Last time on Darkcore Frontiers. Nex's adventure takes a weird turn as he discovers the Darkcore shards are a sentient life form. Nex and his new speaking companion, DC, rescue the captive Auron Starling. The trio execute a plan to take control of the Nebula Nighthawk. But unable to make the jump to hyperspace, they watch helplessly as the fearsome pirate dreadnought, the Hell Runner, approaches. Darkcore Frontiers, Season 1, The Stowaway, by Thomas Chase. Episode 16, The Hell Runner. The Hell Runner, XG-472, Quadrant Delta 7. The airlock hissed open. A gust of air blew into Nex's face, and his ears popped from the sudden pressure change. Gloved fingers dug into his arms as Captain Susek's elite agents shoved him forward onto the Hell Runner's hangar deck. Beside him, Auron Starling stepped down the ramp, his usual theatrical flair subdued. His trained eyes darted about, taking in the situation. The hangar bay stretched out before them, easily large enough to carry a dozen ships the size of the Nebula Nighthawk. Nex's gaze traced the path of security droids as they patrolled the perimeter, their optics scanning for threats. At strategic points throughout the bay, automated defense turrets tracked their movements. A tall officer oversaw the loading operation from a raised platform near the airlock. As Nex got closer, he saw a network of multicolored wires and tubes snaking across his face and neck into metal-rimmed ports in his skull.
Secure the prisoners and prepare for shard transfer,
he commanded, his hand resting on the grip of a fractal weapon holstered at his hip. Agents stripped Nex and Auron of their stuff. A hovering drone scanned him from head to toe. Nex watched helplessly as DC was placed into a containment unit, along with his backpack and Auron's weapon. But it was the Darkcore shards that had the room's full attention. Handlers encased in exosuits pushed the floating containers along, pausing every few meters to check the integrity of the containment field surrounding them. As the last of their stuff was carted away, Nex caught Auron's eye. He gave Nex a tiny nod, but Nex could see the worry etched in the lines of his face. They were totally glitched now, completely at Captain Susek's mercy. Movement behind them drew Nex's attention. The battered survivors of the Nebula Nighthawk filed through the airlock. First Mate Slime shuffled past, his bulbous eyes darting around. In his arms, he cradled a sealed stasis pod, all that remained of Captain Grimhelm. Ironclaw followed, then Kane, his brow furrowed. Tiny and Spank brought up the rear, sticking together like always. As the final container was locked down, everyone went quiet. Captain Susek's voice pounded through the intercom, cold and imperious.
Now let's leave Captain Fox a little souvenir. Something to remember us by.
Nex turned back towards the Nebula Nighthawk. With a loud thump, the docking clamps released. The battered Nighthawk, its hull breaches barely held together by flickering force fields, drifted away into space.
Particle beam charged and locked,
the weapons officer called out.
Target's defenses neutralized.
Good,
came Susek's silky voice.
Fire at will.
The Hell Runner's main spinal cannon lit up as its blinding concentrated stream lanced through the Nebula Nighthawk. The ship's hull buckled. Then it disintegrated in a silent explosion of light and debris. A rough shove propelled Nex deeper into the Hell Runner. As they passed through a series of airlocks and glowing purple UV decontamination chambers, a fine mist coated his skin, leaving behind the stinging odor of antiseptic. The main hallways of the Hell Runner were like veins in some giant metal arm. Agents moved like automatons, not even looking at them. Nex and Auron were unceremoniously shoved into their cells. His new prison was no larger than a closet. Nex felt the oppressive weight of isolation settle over him. His cell buzzed with barely perceptible energy fields. Along the ceiling and floor, dampeners emitted a soft glow, neutralizing any unauthorized tech. Nex ran his hands over the smooth, soundproof walls. This ship was built for serious advanced warfare, and every centimeter down to its brig was highly engineered. Nex sat down on the floor, alone in his thoughts, unable to talk to Auron a few cells away. His reason and imagination began to circle and blur together. Well, that went as poorly as could be expected. Maybe worse. All of their genius plans, their sneaking around, daring do, as Auron called it, up in smoke. Now, not only had they lost the Darkcore shards, they were further beyond reach than ever. And for sure, Nex wasn't getting out of this reinforced spaceship anytime soon. And what did he expect to happen anyway? He was no hero. He was just a stowaway. And this crazy idea of stopping the shards from getting stolen? Was he nuts? He had just made it easier for the pirates to get the shards. In fact, everyone would have been better off if he just made a break for it back on Mordrax 4. Nex looked around his cell again. Maybe the Hell Runner had jumped to hyperspace already. In a fancy ship like this with highly sophisticated inertial dampeners, it was impossible to tell where they were and what was happening. The weight of the last few days rolled over him, and he suddenly couldn't keep his head up anymore. He must have dozed off, because he opened his eyes in a stupor when the cell door abruptly slid open again. Two of Susek's goons stood framed in the opening.
On your feet. It's time.
Nex's pulse quickened.
Time for what?
The guard's lip curled.
Your execution, of course.
Auron stepped forward, placing himself between Nex and the guards.
Now, gentlemen, I implore you to stay your hands. Surely we need not resort to base violence.
His words were cut short as a guard activated a set of hard light restraints. The energy field snapped around Auron's wrists. Nex was dragged to his feet, and he couldn't break free no matter how hard he tried. As they were marched out of the cell, Nex desperately searched for some way out of this nightmare. Finally, they arrived at a gigantic airlock. Nex's legs weakened. Of all the times he had been on his own, the worst he worried about was getting caught, stranded, or starving. He wondered what it would feel like to be blown out into the vacuum of space. He looked over at Auron, whose brows were knit. His worst fear of all was catching a glimpse of Auron as they were sucked out and hearing his screams. As soon as the airlock closed, he would try to plug his ears and keep his eyes shut tight.
Nex,
Auron whispered.
I find myself in the position of having to offer you my most profound apologies. It was never my intention for our adventure to take such a turn.
Nex managed a little smile.
It's not your fault, Auron.
Deep down, Nex knew Auron's whole revenge thing got them into this mess. But being mad felt pointless now. Instead, he just felt sad for the guy and all that had happened to him.
Rest assured, Nex, that while our current predicament may seem dire, my mind is even now racing to formulate a solution.
A burst of static from a guard's comm unit cut Auron off. Nex held his breath, straining to hear.
Understood.
He turned to his partner.
Change of plans. This one goes back to the cell. The boy comes with us.
Nex's eyes widened as rough hands separated him from Auron.
Hey, wait! Where are you taking me?
But his questions echoed unanswered down the metallic corridors of the Hell Runner as he was dragged away into who knows where. The march through the ship's winding corridors seemed like it took both forever and no time at all. Finally, they arrived at a set of heavy doors. One of the guards pressed his thumb to a scanner, and the door slid open. Nex was shoved into the room beyond. As his eyes adjusted, Nex found himself in what appeared to be part command center, part executive office. The walls were covered in panels etched with digital lines that traced the circuitry of the ship's nerve center. Holographic displays hovered in midair, complex algorithms flipped past, and three-dimensional star charts rotated. At the far end of the room sat a large desk, on it a tumbler of half-consumed brown liquid. And there, behind a desk, sat Captain Susek. Nex swallowed hard. Susek's piercing blue eyes bored into Nex's soul, like he was judging every bit of him.
So, this is the boy.
The boy responsible for the tragic end of Captain Grimhelm. Fascinating.
Nex remained silent, looking all around the room. Then he spotted something familiar on a table nearby. DC, powered down and motionless. His power compartment lay open and empty. They had found the Darkcore shard. Susek followed Nex's gaze.
Ah, yes, your droid. A rather ingenious piece of technology for what it is. I look forward to having my engineers examine it much more closely.
Nex clenched his fists, forcing himself to remain calm.
What do you want from me?
Susek leaned back in his chair.
In just a few days, I will deliver this cargo to its destination and collect the bounty for its safe arrival. That is, assuming nothing unforeseen occurs. But in the meantime, I've acquired the most intriguing information about it.
He gestured to a holographic display showing the containers under armed guard in the cargo bay.
These shards, they've captured my imagination. Did you know they're far more than power sources? I've discovered they possess a form of life, in a manner of speaking. And through your droid, they've become quite talkative. The tales they've spun about you, of the secrets in your blood, they are quite intriguing to me.
Nex blinked. How much did this guy know?
You're a Zraynian, the last of your kind, if I'm not mistaken, and I rarely am. Do you see, here on my vessel, I find myself in possession of both a living, breathing Zraynian and these tantalizing fragments of Darkcore gems. One might call it destiny.
Why does that matter?
It piques my curiosity. It's the sort of knowledge those awaiting the shards would be very eager to acquire. Yet at this moment, I'm the only one that possesses this information.
Nex kept his mouth shut. He always knew being from Zrain made him different. But he never thought about how dangerous that could be if the wrong people found out. Susek stood, moving around the desk to stand directly in front of Nex.
I conducted a small examination of one of the shards myself.
He nodded toward DC's empty power compartment.
This shard responded very little to my prodding. Quite vexing to have such power at one's fingertips, yet find it stubbornly silent. Now, there's long been speculation that Zraynian's blood could awaken something unique in these gems. I'll admit, I was skeptical. But now...
He reached out, grasping Nex's chin and forcing him to meet his gaze.
Now, I see the truth of it in your eyes. How exquisitely rare you are.
Nex jerked away from Susek's touch, feeling totally grossed out.
I don't know what you're talking about,
he said, trying to keep his voice steady. Susek chuckled.
Oh, come now, there's no need for such deception. I want you to understand me, truly. You may see a ruthless space pirate before you, but I came from a harsh world, not unlike what you see throughout most of the galaxy. When I was but a fraction of your age, my mother, that woman who bore me, sold me to Flanian pirates. And for what? A water ration.
He smiled.
In that moment I learned the truth. Love is nothing but a comforting lie we tell ourselves. When survival is at stake, we're all nothing more than animals, driven by our basest instincts of fear and preservation. And why should we be otherwise? It's the law of nature. Eat or be eaten. I'm offering you an opportunity, Zraynian. An opportunity to eat together. To collaborate with me on a little research project. Share your knowledge with me. Unveil the secrets of your long-lost world in the shards. Have them speak to you. It will be nothing short of cordial. Straightforward, even. There's no need for drama or unpleasantness. Unless, of course, you prefer otherwise.
They stared at each other for a long time, which was kind of awkward.
It would justify the air you breathe. Perhaps even the existence of your friend, that murderer Rax Jerix. After all, what's a little cooperation in exchange for clemency?
Nex thought of Auron, of DC, of all the people who had suffered because of the Darkcore gems. Auron's resolve would be firm. Could Nex be that tough? He squared his shoulders and looked right at Susek.
No way. I'm not helping you.
Susek's face darkened.
You disappoint me, Zraynian. Surely you've realized by now that I'm cut from a rather different cloth than our late lamentable Captain Grimhelm. His sentimentality was his undoing. I, on the other hand, am a far more formidable adversary. I had so hoped we might reach an amicable understanding. But if you insist on being difficult, well, there are many unpleasant ways to make you comply.
He nodded to the guards.
Take our young friend back to his quarters. We will talk again soon. And I do hope that you'll have had a change of heart by then, for your sake.
As Nex was dragged from the room, he caught one last glimpse of DC, still sitting motionless on the table. The trip back to the cell passed in a blur. Before Nex knew it, he was shoved back into the small space, the door clamping shut behind him. Nex slumped against the wall. His mind replayed the encounter with Susek. Did he do the right thing? If Susek figured out how to control those Darkcore shards, it could be really bad. Was Nex's whole Zraynian connection really that important? There was something about when he touched the shard he still couldn't explain. But then, there was Captain Susek. He was supposed to be delivering these shards to someone else, right? The person behind that whole Aegis transport job. And from where he was sitting, it looked like there was no way to stop that from happening. Unless Susek himself stopped it. His curiosity, maybe thinking he had found some secret way to unlock that power. That could be a weakness. Something Nex could maybe use against him. What did he expect Nex to do anyway? Talk to the shard? Touch it? Somehow do that weird thing he did back on the Nebula Nighthawk? Nex didn't even know what had happened then, or if he could do it again. And if he tried and couldn't do it, Susek was probably going to kill him anyway. But then again, Susek didn't mention the shard saying anything about that. Nex held his head. It was all so confusing. Suddenly, Nex had a crazy idea. What if he played along with Captain Susek, but Nex talked him into letting him touch one of the shards? He had wrecked a waste disposal unit. Maybe he could do it again with something else. That might be enough to distract everyone. Maybe pull off some wild move to get out of there. Kind of like what Auron called a trick in his back pocket or whatever. Nex took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and reached out with his mind. At first, there was nothing but the silence of the cell. But then, faintly at first, but growing stronger, he felt it. The familiar angry pulse of the broken Darkcore energy, calling to him from somewhere deep within the Hellrunner. The presence he had felt whispering in his mind in the Nebula Nighthawk, vast, ancient, beyond understanding. He opened his eyes. One thing was for sure. Nex was tied to the Darkcore shards now. Whether he lived for a long time or not, his fate was tangled up with theirs. And Nex knew right then, he wasn't going to run away anymore. He was going to fight. You've been listening to Darkcore Frontiers. If you enjoyed the story, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Wondrous Legends. And if you like this production, you can help us make Season 2 by supporting us on Patreon at patreon.com/wondrouslegends. Thank you for listening.